Happy Sunday, everyone, and welcome to the podcast that we now have on Facebook, which is awesome. We also have it live on YouTube, and it's still being aired on Twitch, which is one of our normal go-to spots. But tonight we actually have all the hosts together, which is kind of cool. I don't think we've had all of us together in a while. But I got John and John. John and John.
Which one are you talking to?
John and John. John and John. There's two, I think.
That's not helpful.
It's not helpful.
Good luck.
How do we do this then? Do we have names to go by?
I mean, you just called me by my last name.
Lanius and Roos. That's what I'm going to do then.
Yeah, Lanius and Rouge. That sounds good. It works. It works.
Well, gentlemen, how are you guys doing this evening?
Not too bad.
Not too bad.
I'm drinking root beer. I've got a fuzzy cat next to me.
Fuzzy cat. Actually, that sounds like an ideal Saturday or Sunday night. Could be a Saturday too. Could be a Friday night.
I mean, if you look at it from the standpoint of my work week, it's Wednesday.
That's right.
Wow.
Work schedule.
National Park Service. Gotta love it.
Now, getting into the stream tonight, what I wanted to talk about, or we wanted to talk about actually, well, it snowed here today. Which is, for some people, a very exciting thing. And for some of us, we're just like,
Not for those of us that grew up in Wisconsin. We got our fill of snow.
Oh, I'm sure, man. I'm sure this is just annoying.
It's a wet snow, too. Like, dry snow is okay, but wet snow is just miserable.
Yeah.
Although it does make for the best snowballs, which is relevant tonight.
It does, indeed. And that's kind of what we're going to talk about, is what's going on in the winter of 1862 to 63. We've talked a little bit about what happens with the Confederate Army, or the Union Army, excuse me, and where they get the title Valley Forge, and where they start drawing these comparisons to this horrific winter event that, many soldiers experience similar things that these Revolutionary War troops went through, and they're alluding to it in their diaries multiple times. So it's not just one time we're seeing this. But on the other side of the Rappahannock, it seems that there's still some struggles going on, yes, but you have quite a few instances of some troops faring very well, actually. And this is obviously a contributing factor to a number of things involved with the battle directly, as well as the morale, I think, is above all the reason for the differences across the river, especially when it comes to the country's reaction, almost the shock of really what happened to Fredericksburg. I think the Union troops themselves are still really trying to make sense of what really just happened. It seems clear and cut to us today when we look at it on paper and on a book, and even when we walk the battlefields. But I think to really charge something that formidable, and knowing that doing so is almost certain death.
Well, I mean, especially if you're in one of the later waves and you've got the guys who went before you literally grabbing at your legs and your feet, trying to stop you.
Right. There's just absolute demoralization. So there's not going to be any type of high spirit events really happening on the other side of the Rappahannock unless you're top brass and you have a few moments to yourself to do something of that nature. Whereas the other side, over here on the south side of the Rappahannock, scenes are a lot different. Fredericksburg itself is absolutely devastated. Shot and shell are ringing throughout the entire town. My great-grandfather himself actually writes in his diary that he sees a house bearing a shell or a hole or destruction, but there wasn't a single one that didn't bear one of those. So it shows you the town was literally just completely in ruin, and that was something that could have very easily demoralized an army. But I think what overshadows that is the victory the Confederates had. And I don't want to get too much into with the aftermath of Fredericksburg. I wanted to touch on this because I really want to touch on the Confederate morale, and to give an example of how high-spirited these guys are. Again, looking at a town that was just ransacked by an enemy. Well, what was considered an enemy? A town that has been looted, a town that has been torched by some of the shells and just some of the damage that has taken place, and then to fight on this field, in the field surrounding. And to come and see that afterwards, there's a sense of triumph for the Confederate Army. They've won one of the most easiest victories, almost like it was handed to them. So it's certain that they're leaving the battlefield with a very, very heightened sense of just, I'm king. We dominated. Yeah, it's this very big ego. And the ego maybe not the right word for it, but I think at the same time it very well could be the right word for it. Needless to say, the armies are separating, and they're going to go to the respective sides of the river. So the Union's going to the north side on what we call Stafford Heights, and the Confederates are going to spread pretty far out, actually, on the south banks of the Rappahannock. One of those that's spread out 30 miles, just roughly 30 miles. I think it's exactly 27 miles south from the Stonewall, which necessarily wasn't the position that Parker's battery marched from. They actually marched from what would be known as Snowden Hill to go to a place known as Carmel Church. If you take modern-day Route 1, Jefferson Davis Highway, down to Richmond, you will pass Carmel Church. If you take 95 south down to Richmond, you'll see signs off to the right. So it's obviously something important today. It was a rather important crossroads at the time of the Civil War as well. Well, Parker's battery gets there, and again, we were comparing this with the Union accounts of what happens in the winter. And when they're in high spirits when they arrive at Carmel Church. Now, they're not just in the vicinity of the church either. They're actually going to pitch their camp within eyesight across the road from it. In fact, on Sundays, they're having service. Some other days, they're listening to Captain William Watts Parker, who was actually a minister and a physician before the war. He's there giving his sermons, and they're listening to people even as much as William Nelson Pendleton. This is not the same situation you're seeing in the Stafford Heights sector of the battlefield. You're over here 30 miles south seeing revivals of the Christian religion completely taking over the Confederate Army. I mean, they're putting pews into these huge areas and having huge turns out of faith and religious revival activities, and Jackson himself partaking and overseeing quite a bit of this. But I just think in stark contrast compared to what the Union Army is enduring and going through, this is big for morale, and I think later on down the road, when we can cover this when we get into Chancellorsville more often in a later episode, but I think this is the beginning of where the Confederate morale is what gives them the victories that they get at Chancellorsville, and when it comes, of course, to flank attacks and just some of the spirits that they go into battle with. I think a lot of that does attribute to the winter and what they were able to do, kind of refitting and rejuvenating the army, so to speak. They boost the morale, just like Hooker's going to do for the Union troops with multiple different things. And again, that's another topic for another time. But I think this is something that doesn't get talked about a lot, and a lot of people think it's boring because who wants to hear about these huge church sermons that are just breaking out throughout the Confederate Army? But in the long run,
this was a deeply religious time, and we're right in the middle of it. Just in general, right in the middle of the Second Great Awakening, which was one of the great religious revivals in American history, just in general.
Right.
You add to that the circumstances of that the Confederates find themselves in over the winter, and it's not really that much of a surprise that you have this massive spreading of Christian Protestantism throughout the force.
Now, you, Mr. Ruse, you found some quotes. I wanted to get. We're not really diving in too much to like the whole Snowball fight just yet. But that's kind of what the title is here, and the reason we're calling it that is because it snowed today. For those that are just tuning in, we want to get you kind of caught up to speed too. We're discussing why the Confederates were significantly having a much nicer winter. Again, not nice in the realms of it was nothing wrong, but there was different things happening to change their morale and change their mood and to change their position in combat. One of the things, too, I would like to ask Mr. Lonnie is, because he was touching on some stuff, and I know he has studied Wisconsin a lot. The 11th Corps, during the winter of 62 to 63, they're in sort of a unique situation, aren't they? Where they're positioned. They're not really engaged or having as much of a threat because they're the farthest removed from anywhere near the Confederates, aren't they? Am I going off on a tangent that's not right, or... I'm not really familiar with the 11th Corps. That's one thing I haven't brushed up on. But
admittedly, I haven't done a whole lot of reading on the 11th Corps in the winter.
Okay.
That I something I'm still.
Well, cool. Then now we got something to research. Then, cool. Bruce, do you have anything?
Yeah, well, as far as the 11th Corps goes, they were in a lot of people who come to Fredericksburg, just to kind of hit on this real quick. Of course, we always mention the 3 grand divisions, and mainly we seem to also focus only on 2 of the grand divisions of Franklin and Sumner. And then Hooker comes up with his late attacks. And of course, you have Sickles and Birney down on the other end of the field, Birney doing nothing. But there was a 4th Grand Division called the Reserve Grand Division, and they were mainly, a lot of them were up in the defenses of Washington, and a lot of the 11th Corps was up there, and they were nowhere near the Battle of Fredericksburg. If I'm remembering correctly from James S. Pula's book, he's got a 2-volume set on the 11th Corps called Under the Crescent Moon with the 11th Corps in the Civil War, and this is from Volume 1 that I'm trying to remember everything. I don't feel all that great, so bear in mind with my memory from reading the book. But yeah, they really don't pop up. And I think they're under Sigel's command at this point, too. I don't think Howard's around until the spring.
Yeah, Howard's not in command yet. That I do know.
Okay. Yeah, so yeah, they're going to be going through a lot of transitions from moving from D.C. to the front, change of commanders in their corps, and just all this stuff going on. So yeah, the 11th Corps is really some of the babies of the Army of the Potomac when Chancellorsville comes about. So I don't think they have, quote unquote, as bad of a winter, maybe being up near DC, or at least along the main supply line near Acquia. But yeah, they're way back.
I mean, a lot of these guys are coming from northern states and from areas of Germany that are known for their winters. So they're hardly. They have lots of experience dealing with the cold. There's no doubt about that.
Exactly. Yeah. When you think about where, a lot of the 11th Corps and their descendants came from. One thing to definitely say, and I was reading a blog by a certain person by the name of Ty McGraw, and this is called The Confederate Revival, Aspects of Religion in the South. And one thing that really struck me, and I believe you, and if you really did talk about this already, again, I'm not feeling well, I'm sorry. No, but you got a little thing written here from John H. Worsham from the 21st Virginia, and some comments here about, February 26, 1863, the Religious Herald records that revival services lasted 55 consecutive days despite the type of weather, if you were sick or well. I mean, I wonder if they pulled wounded soldiers out.
Oh yeah, they did.
Consecutive days despite from the quote from John Worsham, trees were cut from adjoining woods, seating of at least 2,000 people. I mean, like, it is absolutely crazy. Like, I knew about the revival, but I didn't realize how much it pushed it. But I do think that alone adds. Now, they were, to my feeling, forget about logistics, just mentally, these guys were riding high after Fredericksburg. I like to look at Fredericksburg is the birth of Marsh Robert. That's where I think his legendary status within the Confederate Army is born at Fredericksburg. Because, yes, they had these 7 days, Second Manassas, albeit draw or stalemate at Antietam and then Fredericksburg, and now it's like, hence that invincible feeling. And I believe that really carried over. And then truly having these revivals, believing that almost you are instruments of God fighting this war, doing the work of God in a way. It's like you're going to go about doing your daily day by the word of God, much like how Stonewall Jackson, he didn't worry about death. God already picked the time for him to pass, so he wasn't going to worry about it. So you're doing God's work. God will decide this. I think that was a huge factor for a lot of these, a lot of the Confederacy through the Great Revival down there, especially during this hard winter.
Yeah, and I'm thank you for pulling that article. I think I forgot I even wrote that. That was so long ago, but that was you brought that was I was proud of that too. I was like, man, this was because that's a tough thing to get into. I'm telling you, man, who wants to sit there and read about different religious tracts that are being issued through the armies and stuff? I didn't at first. It was again, me, I guess, trying to find the cure for insomnia. And that was not it, because I stayed up working on this crap. Like, thought R.L. Dabney was the bee's knees. And I'm not calling it crap because it's crap. It's not crap. It's wonderful stuff, but I'm just using that in, facetious terms. But that's how it started. It's like, oh God, why am I even reading this kind of thing? Like, it's so extra, but it's not. It's a very important aspect into how the Confederate mind is going into Chancellorsville. Again, a lot of people don't take the time to put a psychological aspect to the study of the Civil War, and I think that is a very bad injustice to studying the war.
Well, that's why a lot of my study has, and I talked about this on our show with MJ, about how I've really taken up the study of before and after battles, because it's like these armies just don't pick up and wind up at a spot and they fight and then that's it. They just a lot happens, and that's where you find stuff like this. This is where you find how armies are fed, how they're dealing with disease, how they're dealing with filling the ranks and AWOL and so on and so forth. That's why these before and after stories sometimes are a lot more important than the actual battle stories.
That brings me up to a good point too. What I think a lot of people also fail to realize too is the military justice system in the winter of 1862 and 63. Because that's alluded to in a lot of different sources and a lot of different even secondary sources and movies and books, you name it today. When you allude to the winter of 1862-63, there's always one or two either execution scenes or lashing scenes that are going to play through your mind. Again, whether it be popular culture or legitimate diaries, because this is something that was seen. Because yes, you may be having it a little bit better than the enemy across the river, or the enemy across the river is having it better than you, vice versa. But there's still cold, okay? It's December, January, February, and it's in 1860. We don't have the luxuries we have today of modern heating. Hell, we don't even have walkie-talkies. That would have saved a couple of pickets' lives, I'm telling you that much right now. Hell, it would have changed the whole course of the war. But that's too much to talk about right now. The things that they didn't have and the things that just started to become real to the Confederates, and the loss of hope that a lot of these folks did unfortunately go through, despite all of these great revivals and fun times on the river that they were... there was still a lot of desertions, and there was still a lot of rebellion within a rebellion that I've liked to actually quote a few times here recently. But one thing I want to allude to is Jedediah Hotchkiss, which for many folks that may have studied here in this area or know Stonewall Jackson, Jedediah Hotchkiss is his cartographer. He's the one that's going to be providing him with all of the maps that help with a lot of these successful campaigns, specifically Valley. There's a very famous quote, "Make me a map of the Valley." I think that's actually the book title, is "Make me a map of the Valley." But it's fantastic reading. It's a great diary, so if you're looking for something to kind of balance off of the, infinite amount of Stonewall Jackson material that there really is, this isn't bad.
There might be more things written about Jackson or Jackson adjacent topics than every other topic combined.
No, you don't forget about Gettysburg, sir.
Oh,
Lincoln.
Probably half of the stuff about Gettysburg is them asking about is people wondering what would happen if Jackson was there.
Yes, oh my God, yeah, that's true too. But yeah, Lincoln. There's a lot. Like, I love Lincoln. Don't get me wrong, but there's too much written on him too. I'm just like, all right, it's like him, and now Grant's getting it overdone. It's gonna happen. There's spurts of it.
I think Grant is a long way from getting overdone.
You think so?
Yeah.
Maybe I see 5 biographies and I'm like, ugh. But man, that's just me. Maybe I need to give more chances. I'm
just glad George Mead's got another book coming out. There's not enough on Mead, in my opinion.
I'm looking forward to that.
I did not know that was coming out.
One on Mead. Yeah.
Yep.
Look, y'all are the reason my stat gets bigger over here.
You're welcome.
Thanks. I blame Lanius for frickin' Friday. Just kidding. I don't blame you for anything. Or do I? All right. Well, let's get us to where we're going to be in the camp with Mr. Jed Hotchkiss, because I think this would be fun to read for a second. I was thumbing through it earlier when I was trying to just pull some materials for tonight, and I thought maybe this would be a good one. And I came across this scene of the lashings. Like, that was something that kind of threw me off, and I was trying to read the snow, but I got stuck reading this because I couldn't kind of shake that. And now I can't find it, so I sound like I don't know what the hell I'm talking about, and that's just wonderful. Even though I thought I had it marked, but I think I marked the wrong page. Look at that. There's some deep mud on January 29th. And on the 31st, so while I'm waiting to look for it, I'll just read you what he says about today in history. He worked at a map in Richmond, made a tracing of our part of the Fredericksburg fight for Boswell to make his report by... Then he drops there. He says, by, period. Called on Colonel F. at night, then wrote a while. Read a letter from Harrison asking for maps, etc., of our battles, which I must refuse, as I intend to write myself. The day has been very pleasant, thawed some, but the snow is still deep, and it appears that Burnside, the Fed commander here, was relieved from command the 26th, and Joe Hooker put in his place. Sumner and Franklin have also been recalled. Success to the derangement such changes must produce. Poetic words, huh?
I wonder if they actually felt like Hooker was going to be something of a formidable foe.
Mr. F.J. Hooker?
Mr. F.J. Hooker.
I think there was a small inkling that he may be a little different. I don't think there was a general belief that he was... But I do think he had more of a fear factor to him than Burnside did.
Possibly. Yeah, I can see that. I can see that.
I mean, unless you're just scared of Burnside because the mindset of going, up and up and up and up and up and up and up, attacking Marie's Heights that many times. To your average person, hey, I'm not going that far into it. I'm just saying the average person's going to call him an idiot. He's not an idiot. There's plenty of reasons we can back up that he's not. But again, your general mind at the time and knowing that, and especially with it being not even close to a year after it happened, he's still going to be viewed as a bumbling idiot back then.
Yeah.
More so than today. We have time to break it down and interpret it today. They, right then and there, he's like, yeah, I just killed like 1,000 of your boys doing that, man. He knew, they knew.
Well, I mean, especially after the disaster that was the Mud March, I don't think the Confederates probably saw Burnside as much of a credible threat. So, just about anybody other than Burnside probably would have been seen as more threatening.
Yeah, definitely. I believe that.
Hooker was more aggressive for the first 30 seconds of the campaign.
Yeah, he was. I mean, I got a great quote from E. Porter Alexander saying that, and I'm going to paraphrase it piece by piece. Basically, something like it was the best plan ever set afoot against us during the entire war, and it was perfectly executed up until May 1st, 1863. It was like, bam! Once it came time to fight, that was it.
Well, this is way outside what we were supposed to be talking for today, but I've got a pet theory about why Hooker makes some of the choices he makes at Chancellorsville.
Please do share, sir. I'm intrigued.
So this is my theory about what's going on, at least in part, with Hooker at Chancellorsville, is that Hooker has learned the wrong lesson from Fredericksburg. If you look at Fredericksburg, who wins the Battle of Fredericksburg? Well, the Confederates, obviously, right? And how do they win it? Well, they win it by setting up on some nice defensive ground and letting the Federal Army crush itself against their defenses. If you look at Hooker and you look at the letter he sends to the Army on April 30th, what does he tell the Army? It's like, we've got Lee right where we want him. He either has to attack us on ground of our choosing or ingloriously fly. He's not making any mentions about attacking Lee. So if you look at Hooker and you look at what happened at Fredericksburg and you look at what Hooker is saying as late as April 30th, in my mind what has happened is Hooker has taken the wrong lesson from Fredericksburg, and he has decided that being the attacking party is the losing strategy. That the winning strategy is to set up on nice defensive ground and just let the enemy defeat himself. And that's why Hooker moves into this very defensive mindset on May 1st, because he's like, oh, well, he's coming after me. He's decided to attack me on ground of my choosing. This is the ground I'm going to choose, and I'm just going to let him defeat himself.
Huh. I like that. Yeah, think about that a little bit more. I like that. Well, Lord
now
knows.
obviously that was the wrong call.
Yeah.
But again, like if you look at what he's actually saying on April 30th, he's not saying anything about attacking.
No.
He's saying that Lee either has to attack us on our terms or run.
Yeah.
And
he's
in
going to
Hooker's
ingloriously
mind,
fly.
and you could argue that what is happening on May 1st is that Lee is attacking Hooker on his terms. And so he's going to pull the army into this nice defensive corridor. And he does. Like, the wilderness is a terrible piece of land to attack through.
Can confirm.
I
said can confirm.
Yeah, so
No,
it is.
sir.
It is. It's not Marie's Heights, but it is ground that favors the defender. So you could make an argument that he has a very strong defensive line, and if not for that one road from Catherine Furnace that was not on anybody's maps, Chancellorsville turns out very differently.
It does indeed, and we're gonna have to put that into just some. We have so much to talk about, guys.
I know, because now I'm thinking about everything that's ever happened in the wilderness, like at the Battle of the Wilderness, at Mine Run, and yeah, every time someone's in a defensive position, they do pretty well. Wow. Yeah. Holy cow.
To somewhat bring us back on topic, because now I'm floored by that.
Right. I've thrown us way off track.
Thanks,
now.
Dude. I love you to death. Thanks, man. Oh, gosh. No, that was great. I appreciate that topic, man. Again, something to think about, and since it's a snow day tomorrow, something to stay up until the crack of dawn working on. Awesome. We're big on this podcast about providing you primary source materials, because what better way to learn than from them and not us? We could just relay the messages that they left for us, right? I've done a lot of research on Parker's Virginia Battery and a lot of research on Edward Duffy in particular, and I love that I can try to find some topic of the Civil War that we come and talk to and pull just a personal reference so that I can try to relate with you guys on a more of a human level instead of just battles. And I have a memoir written by Royal W. Figg, who was a member of Parker's Battery, and he's the one that actually gives us the quote about Stephen Lee referring to the battery as the boy battery. And the quote that Stephen Lee actually reads to them, or says to them, is, you have been where men only dared to go, and yet you are boys. So median age range in Parker's Battery was 15 to 21, 23.
Oh, wow, they were very young.
Oh, yeah. Well, so Dr. William Watts Parker, he was a physician in Richmond. And he's basically enlisting his patients. He was a pediatrician physician, too, at one point, I believe. I think, if not, that was his predominant thing.
I mean, I suppose that's one way to raise a regiment, or a battery in this case.
And I'm waiting, and it's sad because I really want to put this diary out there, because there's 116 pages of a wartime diary that Edward Duffy, my great-grandfather, wrote and or kept with him. Now, he doesn't start in Parker's Battery. He is enlisting damn near the day Virginia secedes. The guy was 19 years old and hell-bent on serving for the Confederacy, I guess.
So he was hot to trot.
Absolutely. I mean, his brother, Major George Hurd Duffy, was the commander of the Alexandria Department of Artillery before the war, too. He was top brass there, so he gets in Alexandria Artillery and helps secure him a position with Kemper. That's how he's being able to serve, alongside as a friend with Delaware Kemper, because they're major Alexandria-based families, for God's sakes. Duffy's dad, the father of these guys, George Hurd Duffy Sr., he was born just after the Revolution, but his father was banished from Ireland, all right, sent to Wales, got kicked out of Wales, and sent to the United States. When he gets to the United States, guess where he arrives? Oh, he just comes through the port of Falmouth and sets up shop in Fredericksburg and belongs to the Masonic Lodge and makes great friends with Mr. George Washington as Washington's growing up. Oh, I guess he gets even cooler and gets to go and take his tin and silver making tools and his skills and make the silver trowel that Washington uses to lay cornerstones around Washington. No pun intended. But that silver trowel is still on display. So again, we're going to deviate off the main topic here because we're good at that on this podcast. As I'm holding the primary source in my hand. But yeah, that's the thing. They're in those top areas there, you know. So you have George Hurd Duffy then getting bumped up to the chief of ordnance, and EPA actually writes quite a bit about him in his recollections, which is kind of cool to know. Then I found out just the other day, actually, that I didn't know that George Hurd Duffy, had a son. His military agent got conscripted in '64 to serve with the 2nd Artillery Company, Stuart Horse Light Artillery, or something like that. But he's conscripted in 1864 in like August, so he doesn't serve too long. But still, it's just another ancestor in another artillery battery for the South. I'm just like, are you kidding me? I have so many ancestors for the South. All they are, every single one is an artillerist. I just want a single one that's an infantryman. And I'm really
I mean, you do know that means they were smarter, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's what my friend Dan has been telling me nonstop. He's like, you know what they say? The brains went in the artillery.
Like, well, really, the brains went to the engineers, but
yeah.
Next level down was the artillery.
Yeah, exactly. And then I say I can level it out because the two most direct ancestors I have are first U.S. sharpshooters under Hiram Bourdain from Albany, New York. So I'm gravitating more towards that one because I'm just like, yo, I like artillery a lot. I really do. But sharpshooters, though. Bourdain sharpshooters, though.
Yeah, they're all right. No, I'm kidding.
Just kidding.
That's only because of what you're saying.
Right on.
I gotta get a little jabbing.
Of course. So we mentioned Carmel Church. We mentioned that Parker's Battery has arrived there right after the battle, essentially. It's roughly 30 miles south of Fredericksburg. So they're in a better spot. And they're going to stay here several months between the intervening battles of Fredericksburg and Chancellorsville. You know, they coincide when it comes to lining up with reasoning, but not so much as just geographically. I mean, geographically, what am I saying? It's very important geographically. Anyways, where they're at in camp. While they're getting set up and they're building permanent shelters, obviously not permanent in the sense of they're going to live there the rest of their lives, but for the duration of their winter quarters, they're trying to build themselves something more resembling a village, and that actually does pop up on the other side of the church there. But again, if it gets too cold, why not just hunker in the old church there? And that's exactly what they do. Something of note that they had, and again, they get per little personal experience with this. I'm going to read it straight from Royal Fig's recollections here. He says, in our company, there was a musical club called the String Band. Moore, Duffy, and Hallowell, and our bugler, Eglin, were the principal performers. Oft in the stilly night when the winds were gentle and the moonlight shimmered through the leafless trees did the sweet strains of this band beguile the early hours, reminding us of sweethearts and the old folks at home. Then again, who would perpetrate a desperate masculine dance to the time of merrier strains. On Sundays, but not regularly, there were divine service in the church nearby. The only preacher I recollect was Reverend General Pendleton. All of our boys are not good boys, at least not of the praise God bare bones type. They amuse themselves by snowball battles, chasing hares and squirrels, and yelling at every citizen they saw, especially if he wore a tall hat. Come down out of that hat and join the soldier boys, and help whip the Yanks. The unlucky civilian is embarrassed, of course, but 100 voices renew the cry. Come down, I know you are up there. I see your legs. Who would not rather face the Yankees than an army of staunch tantalizers? Thus, some recruits were gained, nor were civilians with tall hats the only victims. Sometimes a pompous or unpopular officer would receive a similar yelling salute as he came riding by. He might complain at headquarters, but how could the commanding general discipline a whole brigade for a breach of etiquette? At this time, January 1863, rations were sufficient, if not abundant. But judging from the experience of Corporal Howard and his cockade invincibles, they were not sufficient for their enormous appetites. Hear the little corporal's story. It was at this time that our mess became involved in a rather serious difficulty in regard to the misappropriation of a certain pig. We had drawn 7 days' rations at one time, there being about a dozen of us in the mess, and all being pretty hearty eaters. In about 2 days, the 7 days' rations were all gone. After fasting a day or so, the boys began to look around the country to see what they could pick up, in the way of eatables. There was an old lady by the name of Mrs. Hackett who lived a little way from the camp. She had a grown son named Joe, who was kind of an idiot. She also had some pigs. We went to her and tried to buy a pig from her, but no, she wouldn't sell one for any price. Finally, Sergeant Tyler, myself, and others picked a chance when Mrs. Hackett was absent from home and tried our luck again. Joe Hackett being left at home alone, we tried to get one from him, but no, his mother said they must not be sold for any price. Finally, Sergeant Tyler stuck on a plan. It being about the time the Conscription Act was put in force, Tyler says, "Boys, let's conscript the fellow and put him in the army." All hands quickly agreed except Joe, who became very much alarmed, and being a large man, he violently resisted. Nevertheless, he was forcibly ejected from the house and carried over to camp, put in one of the log houses, and a mock court-martial held over him. John Pierce, acting as judge, came in with a large red blanket around him and a long knife in his hand, and took his seat opposite the prisoner. After some talk over him, he was sentenced by the judge to be taken down to the woods and hung by the neck until dead. The judge being a hard-hearted man generally, we were not surprised at his decision. To carry out the sentence, we got a prolong of rope from one of the guns, carried poor Joe down to the bottom in the depths of the woods out of reach of the officers, put the rope around his neck, threw it over the limb of a tree, and began to pull away on poor Joe. After getting him up on his toes, he begging most pitifully in the time, Bill Mays asked him, would he let us have a pig now? Yes, he would. We could have them all, if we wanted. Someone asked him for his pocketbook, but he didn't have one. He was then let down, being more scared than hurt, for we didn't intend to hurt the poor fellow, but simply to scare the pig out of him. We then followed him home. He jumped into the pen and insisted on our taking all of the pigs. We told him no, that one would do. We took the pig, carried him over to the camp, killed him and cooked him, and that night had a big eat of pig meat without bread. So there's your differences in situations on the other side of the river, and that's actually pretty sadistic.
Yeah, that's kind of messed
terrorism,
up.
Dude. I'm sorry, I should have said that is straight up terrorism.
Yeah, it's one thing. It does go to show you that
the Confederates were not all. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, this idea that the Confederate Army, at least Army of Northern Virginia, anyway, always conducted itself with the to quote good old General Lee from Gettysburg, that the Army did not always conduct itself properly.
No, it didn't. Look at that right there. I mean, this is...
And in fact, as often as not, it didn't. At least as often as any Union army could be accused of doing so. And that over the course of the winter of 62 and 63, the Confederate Army terrorized, in this case, quite literally, the population of Fredericksburg and its surrounding area.
No, most certainly did.
If I remember correctly, I don't have any on hand, but a lot of letters from residents of Fredericksburg at the time complained constantly and bitterly about their treatment by the Confederate soldiers in the area.
Mm-hmm. One thing that really, to touch on that a little bit too, if you get a couple people that will tell you that didn't happen and that Lee was right, he held the Confederates were too manly or too gentlemanly to not go into someone's home and take their food the way that they have been described doing by themselves, because most of the quotes that we get of them doing this is them themselves telling us that they did this. It's not somebody post-war writing about it in some what they would call revisionist and quote unquote or whatever they want to call it. There's one for both sides. Yankees have their name for it, Reps have their name for it, so on and so on. Because you get things like that on both sides when it becomes biased. But from an academic standpoint, when we're talking about it, you're looking at first source and primary source material being the main grab of all that information of them doing it themselves. They're telling you that they did it. I walked in and I took this much flour. I bashed this guy over the head with the butt of my musket. The lady that almost passes out after she finds out the boys that are in her house sharing coffee with her from Louisiana is the most perfect examples of absolutely proving that the Confederates were doing something of that nature. Why else would she be freaking out? Sure, yes, things were spun, but that backs the Louisianians in the way that they functioned as a regiment. They were lawless. These guys were from Louisiana, the docks of Louisiana. They were rough. This lady was terrified when she found out that they were in her house. She literally fainted, turned white, and almost passed out. And luckily, they didn't do anything bad. They were nice about it. But I mean, that, I guess, you're right. That's something a lot of people fail to realize, is that no, this was common on both accounts. This wasn't something limited to just one side. This was
one of the books that's on my pile to read is War Stuff, and what got me interested in it was that I actually listened to another podcast where they interviewed the author, and one of the things the author talked about was that one of the reasons she wrote this book was specifically because of this myth, this idea that Confederate troops never looted to maintain their own supply lines, and that some of the things that she found was that in some cases at least the Confederates were more likely to loot their own people than anybody else was. Of course, I haven't read the full book yet, so I can't, and I may be misremembering that, but it was this interview where she was talking about it that really got me interested. Of course, another thing that came to my mind is the guy talking about how could an officer discipline an entire brigade, and I'm sitting here thinking, I'm a Wisconsin guy, the Iron Brigade. Well, John Gibbon was more than happy to discipline entire brigades. Tell that to the Iron Brigade when they were getting trained up. He was more than happy to discipline the brigade as a whole.
Yeah, he was, wasn't he? Well, I guess we should go pull back to Mr. Ruse here, because I know he was looking through some quotes earlier. I really want to hear his take on some of the stuff that he came up with today. Ruse, what else you got? I'm interested.
Oh, well, just so it's funny. I know. I think you titled this thing the Snowball fight.
I did.
It's I don't think we've gotten to the Snowball fight, but
we're getting there. I know. I have the Petersburg Regiment books close by. I got that. That's gonna work close on that. I want the funny stories for towards them. But you've got something good going right now, and I want to keep up with that.
Oh, absolutely. But no, actually, I think I'm gonna kind of hit on the Snowball fight 1 second, kind of talk about that morale and well, actually, that whole thing that you just read just kind of like whammied my head. So I'm still trying to wrap my brain around that a little bit. But I found this one quote from A History of Kershaw's Brigade. And one thing that kind of stood out to me a little bit, and I know soldiers need to, in a way, move on and react to the situation, but you got to realize that after the Battle of Fredericksburg, that was it. These guys were done for a little while. I mean, yeah, you had the Mud March, but I mean, that just turned into nothing. But, the odds of anything major happening. And wintertime during the 19th century is really a big time of reflection, I think. And one thing that kind of got me here was from this History of Kershaw's Brigade, the fiercest fight and the hardest run of my life was when Kershaw's Brigade under Colonel Rutherford of the 3rd challenged and fought Cobb's Georgians. And for those that don't know, at Fredericksburg, Cobb, commander of the Georgians that were in the sunken road, and they didn't suffer a whole lot of casualties there. But one major one did happen. Cobb. He was took a shell fragment, I believe it was to the femoral artery. Quote me if I'm wrong there.
Yeah, femoral artery. That's how he was.
Yeah.
It was either a shell fragment or it was a piece of the Stevens house.
Yeah, I think a shell went through the Stevens house, and he told his guys, fight hard. I'm going to come back and command you. Cobb was a tough guy, and it's very easy for that unit to have been very demoralized, and just to kind of read that and just think about what their mindset was like, and to get into a snowball fight in the middle of this trying winter with logistics just being horrendous. I believe you, in your Michael Hardy episode, he was talking about how Richmond was saying we're getting food from Charlotte, North Carolina, and yet that took forever to get food from there, and scurvy was setting in. So I just that kind of stood out to me as to where these the mindset of a lot of these men might have been as that winter was proceeding, and what maybe these snowball fights meant to them.
I think they were just a stress relief.
Big time.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I can definitely say, having been in the Army, at least for a time, when you're bored and you have nothing else to do, you find ways to entertain yourself. And it kind of doesn't matter to a certain degree how tired or demoralized you are. Like you look for those opportunities to have fun, and sometimes they're charming and funny, like these big snowball fights that happened. Sometimes they're really, really dumb, and make absolutely no sense out of context. But in your energy drink, coffee-addled, sleep-deprived mind, it's funny in the moment. But yeah, I mean, those kinds of things are absolutely necessary, or you just go insane. Like it's a coping mechanism as much as anything else.
Tyler, do you think that based off of what John just said, that's kind of like goes along with, how the Louisianans were and everything, just time, boredom, hunger, all that just like kind of adds to that. Also fear that those Louisianans and how that lady responded and everything. Like, what do you think of that? And yet that took
I don't
forever.
know, honestly. I'm actually, when you mentioned earlier that when I read that stuff kind of floored me, and I'm wrapping my head around it. I'm in one of those moments right now myself. It's kind of changing my conventional way of thinking, and this episode is going 1,000 times different than I planned it to, and it's for the better too, because I'm very engaged in trying to, challenge my conventional approach at studying this winter. I'm actually finding I'm more interested than I thought I was.
Oh, that's
I'm learning by like reading and talking out loud to you guys. Like, it's like we're teaching ourselves almost. Does that make sense? Am I
absolutely
cold, or am I? It's what it feels like, anyways.
No, and I learned stuff from you guys talking on this thing, and talking with guests that you have, but then also doing quick research. I just found something else and talking about the boredom of camp life during the winter,
right,
and trying to keep busy and warm. These Confederates that had these snowball fights, they also created like almost entire campaigns. I got a quote here from Bell Wiley from his book, The Life of Johnny Reb. Johnny Reb now armed himself with snowballs, formed regiments and brigades from his own ranks, dubbed opposing comrades the enemy, raised a yell, and charged with a realism that quickened the pulse of participants and spectators. Prisoners of war were also captured in the sham battles and sent to the rear to be paroled or exchanged in POW swaps. I mean, they created campaigns out of these snowball fights. I just find that amazing. And then, like, we did hint on the Valley Forge aspect of what's going on just across the river. This is eye-opening. This is really eye-opening right now.
Well, I mean, one of the most popular things that a bunch of the guys in my unit did when we were deployed was real-time strategy video games that we would all bring. Everybody would grab their laptops and would network them together and play RTSs against each other. So it's a computerized version of kind of the same idea.
That's amazing. That is amazing. That's why these are the types of topics that I think really need a lot more exposure out there in, like where, it's beyond the battles. The battles are the battles, they're there, but getting to the battle and the aftermath of the battle is just, it's really important.
Well, I mean, part of that goes to kind of the traditional way of looking at war in history, and in some ways the role the Park Service has played in kind of emphasizing the battle over anything else, because the battlefields are what are preserved. With very few exceptions, no one preserves a route of march.
Yeah.
No, but at the same time, I think there are small instances where a route of march is kind of saved a little bit. I mean, we're not talking any like distance or anything. Because I literally just like thought about retracting my statement, because I was about to try to compare that to Upton's Road at Spotsylvania. I said, okay, that's feet. I'm sorry, I didn't even think. But
the Jackson Flank March.
Okay, yeah, you know what?
That's
Yeah,
Jackson,
there's that. That's
right?
Jackson.
Like anything with Jackson's name attached to it becomes holy ground.
And that was a good thing we talked about with Hardy. What did we talk about? The legacy of who was it? Longstreet. Was that with Hardy? We talked with somebody. You think
it was? Yeah,
Longstreet got killed that early on. Would he be as potent or not, in memory as Jackson was.
Maybe. That's interesting.
I sure don't think. Personally,
I don't think it would. It wouldn't be as potent, but I think he would be remembered very, very differently. He would be remembered in a way similar to Jackson as another martyr to the cause.
His monument would be taller than I am, right? Mm-hmm. At Gettysburg. Oh, yeah. If he was remembered better, he would have a taller monument.
Oh, probably. But even at that, you wouldn't have had July 2nd if he was killed earlier in the war too.
Well, we were talking about wilderness.
We're
talking about his wounding. If he didn't survive that, if that was his mortal wounding.
See, that's what happens when I miss an episode. I'm all out of the loop.
That was Michael Harris' episode Friday night.
I know. I'm about half hour into it, so I gotta finish it
up. Long for people on the other side. So us, it's like it goes by like that. I mean, it's a little longer tonight because we're kind of late on ours, but we're still pushing. We did, and I apologize for the late start tonight. We were supposed to do it a little earlier, but I had technical difficulties learning how to get this stream to 3 platforms, but I'm glad it worked so much smoother than I thought.
Oh, definitely. But, yeah.
Now, one of the other things I'm pulling today is the Lee's Tigers book. Terry Jones did a great coverage of the history of the Louisiana Infantry and their involvement in the Army of Northern Virginia. And the last 2 that I'm going to be getting in some personal sources today, just to do their plugs before we close up in about 10-15 minutes, and we'll talk about what we're reading right now, and so on and so on. Anyways, Lee's Tigers Revisited is a great book, I guess, in terms of trying to understand some of the military maneuvers, and I guess the socio-political aspects covered pretty well. I'm still 2 chapters away from finishing, and the last time I read it was the first day that we started going into quarantine. So I do need to revisit, but I did remember strongly that there was some good coverage of the winter in 62 and 63. Before I start opening that, though, my last quote on this article I forgot I wrote, that's on crossroadsandcrossfire.wordpress.com. Longest title in freaking blog history, by the way. I don't know what I was thinking. I guess to make it stand out. Yeah, man, you gotta get carpal tunnel just to read a freaking article. But I want to close the topic of the revival. Okay, we're gonna get this real serious religion stuff out. I know that was cool. I'm glad we were able to, touch on that because it is important. But I don't think I want to make that the focus of what we talk about tonight. Because I want everybody to actually enjoy this fun story about the Snowball stuff. But the last quote that I'm pulling is actually coming from a guy named Azariah. I always have a hard time saying his name. Azariah. There we go. Bostwick. He comes to us from Company D, 31st Georgia, which I can do a whole episode on the 31st Georgia if you really wanted to get into that. Especially with what's happening over by the wheat field at Gettysburg. One of my favorite actions. Anyways, this is his emotional response to Lee's emotional order. Lee gives somewhat of this order. It's known as General Number 83. Now, I'm going to, I have it summarized in the article, and I'm going to summarize it again because I don't want to run through an entire sermon that Lee gives pretty much as the form of a general orders. But to me, we can break this down into another episode too and see if this is a breach of separation of church and state, because honestly, I think that it is. Yes, it's in the 1860s, so of course, different mindset. Everybody believes pretty much the same thing. There's mix of beliefs in there, of course, but it's still along the same lines of a theological base of a God and a Jesus type mindset with these troops. His general orders number 83 essentially says, "Soldiers, we have sinned against Almighty God, and we have relied too much on our own arms for the achievement of our independence." So he's saying that his army started equating itself to God. Even he himself looked that his army was almost in the position of being a God. I mean, like I said, you can't get that from anywhere, but that's Lee issuing a general orders. The response to that, this is again Azariah Bostwick. He said, "I believe we as a nation have incurred the displeasure of a just God and have been exceedingly wicked, and that this is the cause of this war. And the reverses we have met with of late have all been for our own good, and to make us more humble, and to have a firm reliance in him who doeth all things well. If we fail to put our confidence in him, how soon may the tide of success be turned against us?" Lee's frightening order, I mean, that what kind of morale, that takes a toll on you for morale too, at least saying that we've been focusing on ourselves being God and where we are not invincible. He's almost admitting that, because I like to break that mold that people try to think that Lee goes out of the way to say that he's invincible. Well, I'm looking at multiple different general orders that people just gloss over, and a lot of different soldiers even questioning whether their army is fit for serving again. Again, this is pre-Chancellorsville, but there is that common conception that everybody thinks that Lee gets that invincibility from Fredericksburg. I don't think he does. I think he honestly, and this is personal, this is, again, not reflecting any type of thing I'm affiliated with. This is personal, saying that I honestly think Lee felt bad about Fredericksburg. I think it's reflected in that winter in a lot of his actions and how he issues orders and some of his postures and happenstances that we see with Lee. I just think it shows a general feeling of that didn't sit well with him. I bet you he cursed Burnside. And I'm gonna break off that now. I just want to finish with that, and maybe we can, again, episode number 10,000, 50, 60, whatever it's gonna be, talk about it then. But moving away from that, when you're in camp that long, and John Launius, you were in the military, so you probably are very familiar with the monotony of camp. What is it like to be in a monotony of a camp like that? What is there to do? How long are you there for? Does it feel like days, hours? Like, what's up with that? What does it feel like?
So it's actually funny you mentioned that, because one of the things I remember when the COVID quarantines first started hitting, in like the military social media circles, there was this big joke going around where it's like, okay, now y'all all know what it's like, because it's basically that you wake up, you eat your meals, you have nothing to do. At least when I was in Afghanistan, we did have there were a couple of hard drives going around that had terabytes upon terabytes of pirated movies on them, so we had plenty of stuff to watch. But you burn through all the stuff you care about pretty quickly.
Right.
And it doesn't take long until you start doing some pretty dumb stuff to keep yourself entertained. I'm trying to decide what stories I can tell on the internet. Probably the classic dumb thing that we did was so I was at Bagram Airfield. We were artillery. I was on the ammo crew. So we were in charge of the trucks with all the spare rounds, and we kept our trucks in the ammo supply point. So when we went on missions, we would drive out with all the ammo guys in the back of a Humvee, and then we'd come back after the end of the mission. Well, we started playing pranks, or started doing stupid stuff to the gate guards when we would come back into our part of the base, because our part of the base was separately secured from the rest of the base. So that every time we would come in, they'd have to open the flap of the back of the Humvee and check all of our badges to make sure we were supposed to be there. And we would just start yelling stupid stuff at the gate guards. I think one of the best ones is we were all tired, whatever. The guy opens the flap and we all yell, "Happy birthday!" And the dude just says, "It's not my birthday." And then just checks all of our badges. Dude did not skip a beat. And whenever we would when the Humvee would back into its parking spot, we would all start mooing. It started out beeping, like the beep you hear on big trucks when they back up.
Supposed to be there.
One of the other guys in the truck got upset with the rest of us who were doing it one day and started mooing instead of beeping because he thought that was equally dumb. And our response was to just replace the beeps with moos. So for the rest of the tour, every time the Humvee backed up, everybody in the back of that Humvee would start mooing in unison.
Oh my gosh.
Like I said, it does not take long before you start doing stupid stuff to keep yourself entertained. And obviously we had more tools at our disposal than guys, back during the Civil War. But, we did a lot of the same. We played cards. We would, throw footballs around. I already mentioned video games was that we're actually there was a Dungeons and Dragons group that formed at one point. Here's the secret: the army's full of nerds. But
I've heard that before.
But yeah, so I mean, it is monotony like you cannot imagine. But for people who like got stuck quarantining at home and weren't able to work or whatever, like honestly, it's a lot like that. You wake up in the same place every single day. You never leave that place. You don't really have anything to do. So you just kind of sit around, try to entertain yourself, and then do it all over again the next day.
Jeez, well, that camp monotony is broken for the Louisiana guys quite a bit, actually. We look at some of their situations along the Rappahannock River. Now, they were put up a little more frontal than the guys over there. My ancestors' battery. They were in Carmel Church, remember. There was a lot of other regiments stationed around the river itself. And situations, I think, around the river are something I want to talk about. And then we're going to finish up by talking about a snowball fight, our books, and then we're going to leave you guys to a good Sunday night. But we look at what happens here, and it's about picketing the river. This comes from the Louisianians. This comes from William Snakenberg. I like the name quite a bit, actually. I think I probably just chose this quote because of his name. It could have nothing to do with this topic. I would have just chosen it for his name. Well, he says, "We used to do picket duty on the banks of the river, and while we were not doing active campaign duty, we did not fire on each other. This seemed to be a general rule in winter when in quarters, and the pickets used to have long talks with each other and always in good spirits. We used to change tobacco, which was scarce with them, for coffee, which was very scarce with us. We even swam in the same water or bathed in spring. If not too cold, and if neither side got orders to fire on the pickets, we generally gave each other notice to go into their holes. I have talked for an hour at a time with them, each on our own side of the river, which was not a wide stream. We could easily throw a square of tobacco across, and they could sling a pound of coffee across and fasten a string or a strap to the package. So I'm sure most of you have seen Gods and Generals. It's shit. Just saying that right now.
It is a very
no
long
disclaimer.
movie.
It is shit.
It is a very long movie. It is, to its credit, very effective Confederate propaganda.
If you've ever seen, Attaché films, go watch his analysis and his breakdown.
It is excellent. He's one of my favorite YouTube creators.
When I was up last night battling insomnia, and I'm just kidding, it's not insomnia, I found some great information and I couldn't stop reading and studying. But I had him in the background, and then I just picked up my head from my book during that episode and mouth open stared at that thing for the entire 43 minutes. Great breakdown, great analyzation of what that movie is when it comes to Confederate propaganda, because it is exactly that. Check it out. Like I said, I reenacting Confederate regiments, I'm not sitting here like crapping on everything. I'm just saying, but if you want to see what that movie was, unfortunately, Ron Maxwell made that movie just crap. If you want truth and accurate stuff about what happens to that, I would even direct you so far as a Shelby Foote before I'll direct you to go to freaking Gods and Generals. Because at least Shelby Foote's pulling straight from the OR. So, he may not have footnoted everything, but at least we know he's just dragging information from that. So I know I'm weird. I kind of sometimes I'm like, I don't think he's terrible. I kind of enjoy seeing it for fun. And if you know what it is and you take it for what it is, and you're not using it to cite your sources, which I wouldn't use as a citation, but I would definitely do that before the other. Just saying. However, the reason I bring that up and try to give you a quick breakdown on do not rely on anything from that movie like I'm about to do, I'm just using it for a quick visual. There's a scene where they stand across the river and hand each other the coffee, and that was so widespread. That thing right there was in that movie because that was true. Were they over there talking, actually walking across the Rappahannock? They were not walking across the Rappahannock because the Rappahannock was 420 feet wide, especially in the sector that most of these people were at. Sometimes 425 feet wide. You get further downriver, you're looking at it widening to 600 to 700 feet. So I like the description here specifically. where they're talking about slinging it across. I really haven't found any quotes, and boys, you correct me if I'm wrong, if you guys have someone that you've read this from, about the sailboats being sailed across to the other side. I've never really read any direct stories from any primary source about that happening. I've always heard it was like thrown across, or like they would swim or whatever, you know. But there's always these stories that are told that, oh, they were putting them in paper boats and sending them across the river. You ever heard that?
Yeah.
You have? Do you know where it came from? I would love to know. Okay.
I've heard it, but I don't know where it came from.
I mean, either. John? Bruce?
No, I got nothing, but I'm trying to picture the throwing it across. I mean, we all got the legendary stories of George Washington skipping a stone across the river and all that. I don't know about launching something across the river.
I don't know, man. I bet you.
Clearly, they were using Cohen mortars.
That's right. I mean, they drink what is it? The old Stack or 2 energy drinks. They were taking little like 5-hour energies before they threw it over. Oh, I'm eating my own words. I love this.
Find it.
Literally the next sentence after that quote I just read. I'm going to take a moment of silence to put an F in chat. Thank you. Okay. Some of the Tigers used miniature hand-carved boats to ferry the trade goods across the river. One soldier even managed to get a letter delivered home in an occupied Louisiana by sending it over a Yankee mail. The only drawback to such illicit fraternizing was the discovery that Federals were not too adept in sailing, and the return cargo often drifted downstream out of sight. A number of Tigers, like the 9th Louisiana's Ezra Denson, even accepted the Yankees' invitation to cross the river for a visit. Upon his return, Denson told his messmates that the Yankees hailed from the old Northwest and were as tired of the wars as the Louisianians. They expressed a hearty desire to witness its termination. Sergeant Stevens reported Denson saying, "For they were disgusted, discouraged, and dissatisfied, and could not digest old Lincoln's actions, calling for Nope, we're not going back to the rest of that statement. But that's pretty much what they're saying. You know, they're talking, they're fraternizing, yeah. You be really careful with breeding Louisianians. I should have known better. I love them. They have the most unfiltered diaries out there.
Because they have no filters.
Exactly.
My dad grew up at least partially in Baton Rouge.
Oh yeah.
And the only direct ancestor I know of to the war was in the 13th Louisiana Partisan Rangers.
Really?
Yeah.
Partisan Rangers.
Isaac Woodard.
Now I'm looking at back into the Parker, and I'm not on figs, but we're finishing up here with that, the last bit of our winter here, and then we have a snowball fight. The good influence Captain Parker was to his men, their comrades in Moody's Louisiana battery were bad enough to more than compensate. On one of the churchless Sundays, some of Moody's men filled the void in their lives by stealing a barrel of whiskey with the help of Alex Williams of Parker's battery. On another occasion, Moody's men stole the whiskey out of a barrel, which was guarded by sentinels in the hallway of Colonel Alexander's headquarters. They accomplished the theft by boring through the hall and into the barrel in order to tap it from beneath. Food was no less secure for Moody's Madison Tips and their accomplices in Parker's battery than was whiskey. As one of the Richmond boys noted, the Louisianians would not allow a cow to gore or a hog to bite them, and if either animal attempted such a thing, it would be most unceremoniously transferred to their huge camp kettles and ovens. On one occasion, some of Moody's men enlisted the aid of some of Parker's men, and the whole motley crew impersonated Porter Alexander and his staff as a means to facilitate the theft of a hog from an old farmer in the vicinity. Before long, the old fellow came stalking into camp with blood in his eye, declaring that some scoundrel named Alexander was a thief. The food routinely available to all of the men without recourse to larceny was sufficient, if not abundant. There were particularly good beef issued to the men, but in quantities only a fraction of the amount required to sustain strength. There had been some advance notices that New Year's Day dinner from the Army was going to be something special. Civilian donations had been promised to supplement the feeble efforts of the Confederacy's doddering commissary system. Good Lord. The results were disappointing. The dinner delivered to the 78 men present for duty with Parker's Battery on the holiday consisted of 1 turkey, 1 chicken, and 5 loaves of bread. The soldiers pronounced the dinners a fake and sent it back to Richmond for distribution among the poor. Rations for ordinary days were just subject to diminution from the announced standards, and in January, the Richmond commissary people ordered a reduction in the daily ration to 4 ounces of salt meat plus some sugar. In April, Alexander wrote home that the men in the battalion were getting just 1/4 pound of fat bacon daily. General Lee was fearful of the potentially disastrous effects of the poor diet in his men's capabilities. In an effort to provide some balance, Lee ordered each unit to gather scorbutics from the fields and forests, sassafras buds, wild onions, garlic, lamb's quarter, poke sprouts, and the like. Stop there with Parker's Battery because he gets really in depth with different sprouts and stuff, and I don't need to go that far into it. But I wanted to finish with Parker's Battery there because it shows you again where the food stuff is kind of becoming a problem now too. So it was kind of nice and easy as the December months were waning into January, but as we're getting into later January with Parker's Battery there, they're running out of food. That's going to cause morale to go down. So, but that can also, we can pull straight in from the Great Revival as to why that was so important, because these guys are virtually starving out here. Last but not least, I'm coming up onto the Snowball fight. This is the reason I wanted to do this stream, and it's a short fight and it's a short coverage of it, but it's so funny and so important, I think, to show how they can release. These are guys. These are just wanting to have a good time. They're in the middle of the most defining moment of their lives. They're in watching their best friends or family or somebody very close to them killed in a very horrible way. This is somebody's coming of age moment. This is somebody's heroic moment. They felt so called to serve here, and with all this stress going on, they have a minute to sit there and pack ice into the shape of a ball and lob the hell out of each other with them. And you know what? I think for them that was a huge relief, and I think it's really important that we touch on something that may seem so small to us in the grand scheme of things, but how much, I guarantee you, most of those soldiers that made it through the war, I guarantee you not many of them forgot about that. They probably remember that Snowball fight over some of the battles that they fought in, truth be told. I'm no psychological expert, so obviously I'm just, again, speaking for myself. But I do believe that, I know for myself, if I was going through something, the bad would be somewhat blocked out, but I'll remember something as fun as an entire regimental plus Snowball fight. That's fun. Well, I think the 12th Virginia thought so too, so it was marked heavily. And if you ever get a chance to read the regimental history of the 12th Virginia Infantry by John Horn, I cannot stress the recommendation on this. It's one of the greatest regimentals I think I've ever had the chance to read. And this is appropriate too, because this Snowball fight happened just around this time in 1862. It was like January 27, 28th when the fight happened. We start with one time the Virginians, we're way too early. Snow began falling on January 27th. 8 inches lay on the ground the next day. The Confederate troops fought snowball battles. Mahone's Virginians had more experience with snow than the deep Southerners of the Norfolk Division and the other brigades, and established themselves as Division Snowball champions. A battle with Perry's Florida Brigade lasted 2 hours, but the Virginians finally won. The way we rolled them around, it was a sight to see, Sale exulted. In a battle with Wright's Georgia Brigade, Mahone's troops whipped them out easy, remembered Phillips. One time, the Virginians faced both the Florida Brigade and Posey's Mississippi Brigade. The Floridians and Mississippians advanced in battle array, with officers mounted and color bearers carrying pieces of red blanket for banners. They gave Mahone's men time to get ready, then charged. The superior numbers of deep Southerners overwhelmed the Virginians, who broke after a stubborn fight. The Floridians and Mississippians pursued the Virginians pell-mell through the camp, but Mahone's brigade had kept in reserve the 6th Virginia. Hidden behind the tents, at the camp's far end, its men had filled their haversacks with snowballs. The attackers passed the 6th, which emerged from ambush and struck their flank. The fresh troops had a full supply of ammunition. The Floridians and Mississippians had empty hands. They had to stop to make new snowballs. The 6th Virginia pounded them. Mahone's other soldiers rallied on the 6th with a shout. The entire Virginia line advanced, and the deep Southerners gave way. The Virginians pursued them and captured many of their flags. Come on. You tell me a large game of capture the flag and a bunch of snowballs isn't a fun time? That's exactly what that was. That was your 1860s capture the flag. I also think Pickens Charge was a pretty good game of capture the flag too.
Oh yeah,
they got a
nice
lot.
comparison.
Yeah, I'm gonna say that's the real capture the flag. I also want to say I didn't mean to say this earlier, but I meant to say Stonewall Jackson earlier. And as we were talking about Snowball before we started streaming, I said Snowball Jackson. And I want to find a way to incorporate some type of thing with Snowball Jackson. So guys, if you watched today and if you gotten anything out of this, not from that, but you heard Snowball Jackson and you can draw me up a picture of Snowball Jackson, please do.
Well, you know, it's funny because I'm reading stuff to leading up to this, and I got a little, call it a blog written up about General Hoke's North Carolinians having a snowball fight against Colonel Stiles' Georgians. And there's one part that's marked here. I'm going to read it. It was noted that General Stonewall Jackson had witnessed the snowball battle. One soldier remarked that he had wished Jackson and staff had joined the fight so he could have thrown a snowball at the old faded uniforms. So, in the monotony of Army camp, John, do you think throwing a snowball at one Stonewall Jackson would have been a smart move?
Oh, good God, no.
The craziness.
No, I don't know. No, Jackson, he would have had you shot. I mean, probably not actually, but I have a hard time. I have a hard time seeing Jackson engaging in that kind of frivolity, at least in public. In the privacy of his own home, yeah, sure, but not in front of soldiers.
No, I don't think so.
John, did you have any of you guys have any more quotes you want to do or talk about really quickly before we wrap up the snowball portion and get into just our last bit here, which is what we're reading right now and what we're going to recommend for the week? Anything?
I'm good.
You're good?
Yeah, no, I'm good. I wanted to get that Stonewall Jackson quote out there, thinking about hitting him with a snowball.
Well, I think as a good way to close that out, we could close it out with Snowball Jackson, and I appreciate you being able to do that. Now, as you know, we all read copious amounts of books. Some of you might think it's unhealthy, but you can mind your business. Read a book too. Gonna start with you, Mr. Lanius. I want to know what you're reading this week.
Well, I'm a slow reader, so I'm still reading the same thing I was before, searching for Stonewall Jackson. I don't know if I told you about that last time.
You told me, but you haven't told them.
Yeah, so searching for Stonewall Jackson. Here, let me pull it out so I can get the whole... searching for Stonewall Jackson. Searching... let me get the full title up here. Give me a second. Searching for Stonewall Jackson, a quest for legacy in a divided America. Honestly, it's been a little disappointing so far. It's not. There hasn't been a whole. The title definitely suggests a lot of critical analysis, and so far there has been none of that. So I'm hoping that that's coming later. It's been an otherwise pretty readable history of Jackson's wartime endeavors, interspersed with the author's sort of travels through the same places, but not a whole lot of critical analysis, which is what I assumed it was going to be. So I'm probably going to still read the whole thing in hopes that it turns into that, but I haven't found any of that yet.
Fair enough. I've looked at it like I wanted to buy the book. I haven't actually been able to bring myself to get that one in particular. That's like Lee's reading the man about Lee. I am not able to bring myself to buy that one yet. I did get the Wartime Papers of Robert E. Lee. I do want to start reading that because I think I want to do a decent study on him eventually. No pun intended. Eventually, I didn't even remember what. Never mind. I'm just silly tonight. The other thing I was thinking about doing too when it came to Lee, I saw that Savage Beauty, there's a new Lee book coming out. It's like a day-by-day account of Lee. But, of course, it's weird that I'm not weird, but it's like, it's normal thing around here to be drawn to Lee and want to do that. But, for a different reason, I don't want to really study about to go and glorify him. I'm trying to really get into the mind of some of the stuff he does here. Because I look at some of the geniuses and the attacks that he plays out, and just the fortifications that he pretty much has constructed around Richmond and, you know, the coastal cities of Virginia early on in the war, and how incredibly ingenious those things are. They're wonderful. I don't know, John, and have any of you guys actually ever been able to go down to Fort Harrison or one of those battlefields at all?
I have not, no.
You have not?
Nope.
All right, that might. Well, when I've talked to Bruce about this earlier, but I've looked into investing in podcast stream cameras that can be taken out to the field, and that's in the works right now. We're getting that for this to come up, so that if we have a day where hosts can get together, we can take a trip to places like Fort Harrison and go live on the scene, which I think would be awesome. We can have these cool little Mr. Coolio masks, and we can have our own little mask. That'd be awesome, man. We just go and teach history on the spot. But Fort Harrison itself, you see the construction of these things, and I should be calling it Fort. Well, no, Fort Harrison is what the Confederates would have called it, but when they lose it for good. And I've told you this, John, that they take it over and it becomes Fort Burnham, and then they get kind of like, well, if you're not gonna let us have our fort back, we're gonna build one in your front yard, and they build one too. And there's just pictures of these two sentries staring at each other from across the parapets of the forts. But all that whole the defensive system, what I guess I'm getting at, I should have that far in, is that those forts all connect what Lee constructed early on in the war to protect the city of Richmond. And if you look at it from that way and see how they were used even into late 64 into September when they launched those assaults at Chaffin's Bluff, that takes some incredible discipline and some incredible intelligence to construct something like that. His idea. And they called him, the King of Spades? I think it was King of Spades, right?
Yep.
Yeah, King of Spades. And he was look at what happened at Williamsburg. The Confederates didn't trust, it was Magruder, did not trust the works and would pull out of forts and let the Union take them. He would wait till they got close and then pull back. Use them as just protection, kind of as a fallback, which they were not meant to be used as. So I do challenge the traditional of, hey, this was a smart move where he was falling back and falling. I'm like, no, I don't think that was smart at all. I think that was bad because they were not designed for that. They had fields of fire in front of them. You could have completely wiped out anything coming at you. They were frontal assaults, and you had 24, 25-foot bulwarks in front of you. What are you doing? He's massing troops to fall back and fall back and fall back. So, I mean, and the reason I think that was happening was because there was no trust in Lee's earthwork abilities. And then in 1864, that Lee's earthworks ability make life or death for you. So, don't ever tell me that they started digging later on in the war. First thing they did, before even Bull Run, entrench. There was an entrenchment at Big Bethel. So those things are important. Mr. Roos.
Mr. McGraw.
How many books are you reading this week, first of all?
I'm a slow reader as well. I have a tendency to get to like page 200 and something, and then just life gets in the way, and that's that. My current read is not Civil War related, so I'm going to keep that kind of like close to the vest right now. Just because I don't want to anger anybody, but I was very curious about the book.
It's a history-related podcast, dude. I don't care. What are you reading?
Oh, I know. Well, it's a lot more contemporary history about a recent president. No, not 45. But yeah. No, actually, I'm kind of eyeballing The Fiery Trial by Eric Foner, Abraham Lincoln and Slavery. Of course, there's a lot of books about Abraham Lincoln and slavery, and I don't know. I'm kind of eyeballing it because I like the cover, to be honest, and it's just kind of standing out. I'm like, maybe I'll pick that one out right now. But yeah, I mean, we're kind of been dying to get back into Civil War reading because I decided to take a short break, and short break turned into a way too long of a break. But I will say that, we were talking about routes and stuff earlier and what's available. And I just do want to remind those that haven't heard it. Tyler and I did a podcast about driving tours and stuff, and we did recommend a bunch of books that do basically follow the armies, whether it's, you're following the Overland Campaign, or you're following one of the two armies' approaches to Antietam or Gettysburg, they're out there. Those routes are out there. They're just hard to find, and these books are amazing. So I just wanted to throw that plug back out there for that podcast and those books from Emerging Civil War.
Oh, yeah, and from now on, when we finish these videos up, Savage Speedy will be a permanent link in every single comment box that you guys go to, so when you look for the information about where to buy books at, because a lot of the books we're going to recommend to you from here on out are from Savage Speedy. So,
Yep.
I honestly, like I said, if you guys can buy them and you're going to get books, don't go to Amazon, please. If they are on Savage Speedy and publishing there, support independent publishing.
Exactly.
I don't drink beer anymore. I used to go and support craft beer all the time, independent breweries all the way still. If you drink beer, please go to the hell and support those independent breweries. But now that I'm pushing harder for independent publishers. Savage Speedy being my number one fave. Go to them. They have so many good books to choose from. All the ECW books that we talk about and love so much, they're on there as well.
Absolutely. I was actually on...
Ted Savage is a really good dude. So if you get to he plays some cool music too. As a bassist, I really appreciate him as a person too, because I'm like, all right, man. And he's in the legal stuff too. I deal with legal stuff every single day, so I can understand. Nowhere near as a lawyer. I wish I honestly considered a lawyer career path, because it seems like it'd be fun. But I have enough of legal issues to look at on Capitol Hill. I can.
Oh my goodness!
Yeah, I have all that fun stuff there. I guess I can talk a little bit about the two books I picked up to read this week coming up. It's a snow day, so I'd know, obviously commuting is probably slim to none when it comes to the chances of that happening. And I was reading a book. I normally don't do this, and I don't want this to be a slew at an author. I'm not talking about anything with the person, but I picked up a book recently because I wanted to see for myself if it was really worth reading and challenging interpretation, because it was a new look on the Civil War. And I'm not going to go too far because, again, I don't like being mean, but I picked up the book and I started reading it, and it was really good at first. I thought some valid points and valid arguments were being made about the author's thesis. It made me feel like I could kind of write a review. I was ready to go and write a review once I finished. Then I got to the Chancellorsville portion, and I was floored by what I read, to be quite honest with you. I pulled up on this sentence that was noting that Hooker was wounded and out of it on the 2nd during Jackson's flank attack. Which, if that is the case, that changes the entire narrative of the Battle of Chancellorsville. And I've obviously never, ever, ever heard that was the case. Not even on accident. And, maybe that's what I thought she meant by that, but she continues on in the sentence to allude to the 2nd. And to me, that was it. I was like, okay, well, this was obviously intentional. Meaning that this is what they thought. Now, again, I'm not going to say the book was crap just because of that, but it turned me off so much because I feel like you didn't really go through to look at that too much. And the time, I don't know, was it rushed? Again, am I being too nitpicky? I don't know. But it was just a turn off for me, so I put the book down. And I normally don't do that at all. But I won't be returning to it, so I do not recommend. And I'm not gonna give the name, but don't. One I picked up is, I guess it struck me because of the title at first. It's a very provocative title, and it's called "America's Good Terrorist: John Brown in the Harper's Ferry Raid." This comes out of Casemate Publishers, which I've actually gotten quite a few good books from Casemate recently. One of them being The Cornfield of Antietam. That was a very good read. And I'd pick it up again and probably read it if I had not a stack of 50, 60 books to read. But this was published last year in 2020. So it's rather new. And it even on the back, it alludes to Congressman John Lewis and some of the good trouble comments. And I think that, a lot of the book actually touches on that too. So that alone was a huge draw. So I'm sure a lot of you on Twitch and Facebook know that I had, I thought John Lewis was quite a cool person, and I got to speak to him quite a few times at my work site, and being able to interact with someone of that stature that I had so much respect for, it was tough to see that happen this year. And then finding books that have been coming out, specifically one that's alluding to a time period that I study so much, and it has John Lewis in it. It was a no-brainer. You're not reading that. You're definitely picking that up. So that's there. When I finish my main, which is 1,000 May Fall, Life, Death, and Survival in the Union Army by Brian Matthew Jordan. This book, I think, is brand spanking new. It has a date of 2021 in the side of the book on the copyright. I'm not sure exactly. I should have remembered exactly what day that one came out, but very excited to read this one. I've heard a lot of good things on it, and I'm actually excited to hear the author speak on Impediments of War coming up. I think it's in March for that one. And when I know more about that again, that'll be in some of our show notes. But those are mine. John, what was the name in the author of yours? I want to put it up in the comments real quick before we go so people can look at it later.
Well, let me bring it back up.
All good. And then Ruse, I need yours next when he's done.
Yep.
Thank you, good sir.
Searching for Stonewall Jackson, A Quest for Legacy in a Divided America by Ben Cleary.
Stonewall Jackson, A Quest
for Legacy in a Divided America.
For Legacy in a Divided America.
Got it?
Yep, and the author?
Ben Cleary?
Cleary?
Yeah.
B-E-N.
Clear with a Y at the end.
C-L-E-A-R-Y. Got it. And that is yours there. And then Mr. Ruse.
Yeah, well, like I said, the one book I'm thinking about picking up, The Fiery Trial by Eric Foner. It's The Fiery Trial, Abraham Lincoln and American Slavery, winner of the Pulitzer Prize. And then, like I said, also I made a couple of recommendations based off of, since we hinted at driving tours and routes of armies and marching routes and stuff like that. Just to give you the
Fiery Trial, Abraham Lincoln, and what? Sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, buddy.
Oh, The Fiery Trial, Abraham Lincoln and American Slavery.
Eric Foner.
By Eric Foner, yep. And then the other ones that I kind of suggested, if you're interested in Antietam and you want to follow the routes of the armies, To Hazard All, A Guide to the Maryland Campaign, 1862, by Robert Orison and Kevin Pollack. If you're interested in Gettysburg, who isn't, Disneyland of Civil War parks.
Of course it is.
The Last Road North, A Guide to the Gettysburg Campaign, 1863. Robert Orison and Dan Welch. And then for our own backyard, if you're interested in the Overland Campaign, No Turning Back. It's a long title. A Guide to the 1864 Overland Campaign from the Wilderness to Cold Harbor, blah, 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 May 4th to June 13th, 1864. And a whole lot of authors, Robert Dunkerley, Don Fons, and David Ruth. That's a lot of stuff.
Yeah, it is. I will.
You could probably shorten all that up.
Yes, when I do the official notes, I will post all the ECW stuff and the Savage Speedy links into the show notes, like we've done the last few times. It's going to be same format, same place. There it always is. You guys know it by this point because we're almost 10 episodes in. Tomorrow's another episode for someone. If anyone can. If not, don't worry, I'll do it myself. So I still want to do the Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and then of course we just do the Sundays if we can all get together. Because it is nice to have all three hosts here. Because you guys know John Wallnews and John Ruse have been here so much at this point. But they're hosts. It's no question about it. They've been absolutely instrumental to this show, and it wouldn't be anything without them.
I appreciate it.
Of course, guys. I mean, seriously, I love the conversations that we have. And we have some funny ones. We have some very serious ones. John completely kicked ass this week with that Sand Creek Massacre talk, dude. I mean, God, I have half a notebook of notes from you. Thank you, by the way. Like,
My pleasure.
Yeah, man. I told a lot of people about work. I was like, if you want to hear something just like fucking powerful, this is it.
I gotta listen to that. I haven't heard that one yet. I gotta hear it.
Yeah, I want to say by a lot of the ones that I've heard when it comes to even just talks, like, oh, dude, I wish I could have met you out at Sand Creek and been there to walk. That would have just made for a oof. So good, man. Like I said, I was very impressed, and I really hope we can get another talk from you sometime soon on something like that.
Sure.
I'm interested about your Wisconsin. When you finally formulate that and you're ready for it, I want it because I think that if you have the power that you had behind the Sand Creek shit, man, that we gonna be golden. I'm ready for it.
I'll let you know when I feel up to presenting it to the public.
Fair enough, man. And eventually, I don't know, I think this week, I like the idea of winging these topics because they end up very well when they're not scripted. Because we get into some really good conversations, and that gives us the room to do what we did today, or we could just go off on a tangent on something else. That's okay. That's encouraged because we again, what scheduled topic do we adhere to? We got our topic knocked out in very concise, I think, decent information, I hope.
I think so.
So do you guys
Absolutely.
have any recommendations on maybe what I would like to get maybe one apiece from both of you, and after I finish typing this, I'll put that in there and I'm gonna close this out because it's about to be 8 and I want everybody to go out and get some sleep or some rest in case we have to work tomorrow. But my thing is I want to see if you guys come up with 1 or 2 topics for me, and I can create. There's a little poll that I can create on the Mr. Ocolio page on Facebook, and if people are willing to vote, we can try to get ideas on what they would people want to see. I know there's an interest in West Virginia and the Civil War, and I'm waiting until I can read Eric Wittenberg's book on the seceding from secession before I really dive into doing one of those, because I want to make sure I'm doing some justice. And Wittenberg's a fantastic author, so a better way to do some research than read a good author. From that, though, I think I want to see what you guys have, and again, it does not have to be Civil War. I'm okay with it straying away a little bit. I mean, I would still like to keep it a focus, but every now and then branching off and doing a different history, I think is okay.
Well, you
Absolutely.
got mine. You got mine.
The Forgotten Fall. That's going to be Friday.
Yeah.
We are doing
The
Forgotten
Forgotten
Fall Friday. I guess we can finally say that. John, if you have the opportunity, I don't know if you're busy or not, you should come in and do Forgotten Fall with us.
I'll let you know.
Yep. If you're working the visitor center at all this week, the bookstore, to prepare for it, the 2 books I'm reading, so we'd be on the same page. You guys have there. It's the 2 ECW books. One of them is the Mind Run, and then the other is the Bristow Station book. We'd be talking about those 2 little battles, so if you have the time to take a little bit while you're in there, I would grab those 2 and keep them at the desk and read them for a little bit.
I just may.
I've been to Mind Run. I enjoy it, and I have not picked up the book and actually read it, even though I bought it and it's on the shelf. I just never opened it and read it. But that's this week, too, for the study stuff. I should have counted that for book club, but you know what I got. Thousand May Fall is definitely top of my list right now, because that's brand new, and I want to get into that pretty early on. Other than that, guys, I appreciate that. I will confer with the hosts here, John, and we'll find out some topics, and we'll maybe be able to start putting out some topics out earlier before this, like 10 minutes before when we're normally putting topics out. It probably would be nice to have them out a little earlier, so we'll talk and see what we can do, but until then, we're just winging it, because winging it works. Thank you guys for joining. If you're on Facebook, thank you. Spotify, thank you. YouTube, thank you. Twitch, thank you. You guys have a wonderful weekend. The rest of your weekend, and see